11.
Vino Kevin, pero no sé.
Kevin is here? Kevin's here. There is space. Of course, I'll find a chair for you. Don't worry. We'll bring a chair for you, Kevin. Kevin Newmeyer from the Excelsior College. Cintya Martinez, President of AMIPCI. Lina Ornelas, Head of Public Policy and Government Affairs from Google, Mexico. Abigail Slater. She's the first time that it's the first time that she's here. She's the Vice President for Legal and Regulatory Policy Internet Association. Thank you, Olga. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Adrienne, for the invitation. It's a real honor. And I would like to share something with you. Olga very kindly sang Las Mañanitas to a colleague of mine from Mexico because it was her birthday. The thing here is that it's important for everyone to know that last week was Olga's birthday, and next week it will be Adrienne's birthday, so happy birthday. Thank you, and really happy birthday. And congratulations to you, because we've had a chance to share several sessions of the South School on Internet Governance, and it gets better and better. I honestly don't know what will happen next year because the bar is quite high. Every year they get better, they grow, and it's an honor to have the opportunity to be part of the faculty of this school. This panel is a panel made up of friends. It's a very important panel, key panel, because we'll talk about security and privacy, two issues that might seem contradictory in a way, but for this reason, we've prepared some questions for each one of our panelists. And I would like to provide you with a brief introduction on the issue, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. In this regard, I would like to say that as representative of the South School on Internet Governance, it's a pleasure to see familiar faces. And the society where we're born, where we are on a daily basis, the virtual society depends on the real society, but it has its own characteristics. Society has local limits, it has geographical and political borders, but the virtual society trespasses those demarcations and actually flows across borders. And it's a global society. Cyberspace is where this virtual society unfolds, where the perception, space, and time gets altered. Users, actors, observers of the virtual society are growing exponentially, and they are clarifying their rights, they share them, and they're strengthening them. Cyberspace is an educational space too, research space, as well as the space for commercial and market transactions, economic policy, social activism, as well as criminality. This society is developing new identities, developing new citizens, the famous net citizens. It's a term that includes net and citizen. In other words, new terminologies being developed, new jobs, and even new crimes might be developed, such as those perpetrated by hackers and counter-hackers, as well as those introduced by viruses and antidotes, in order to defend themselves against those attacks by people that are just curious or not, who are trying to seize goods, work, or knowledge by others. This entire conversation that is connected is also transforming the public. As narcissists, we are also seduced by our own image online and the temptation to have more social links. I will take my own selfie right now. In any case, it's possible that at this time of maximum social connectivity, there might be less real connections than before, fewer connections than before, real connections. McLuhan already foresaw this possibility more than 40 years ago when he said that the extension leads to amputation. With mobile cell phones and social devices, we are connected to screens and in a virtual manner with friends in the 5 continents. However, that might affect our real connection. We might call this a state of shared loneliness. In other words, we're closer to people that are farther away, but farther from those that are close to us. In the past, we could disconnect from the media, just turning off a device, leaving the system. Now, that is an exception to the rule, and for many, that's a reason for conflict. If you suggest to disconnect a young person, he will say, to disconnect? What do you mean? Why are you punishing me? We are almost always connected to some device or another that has access to the internet, whether it's a smartphone, an exercise monitor, a display, a tablet, a video game, or screen. We have extensions of our bodies that have the shape of a sensor, signal, and a server, such as we saw yesterday or the day before yesterday. These devices register an enormous amount of data about how we live, our daily lives, the people that we know, the products that we consume, and the information that we look for. In fact, this means just are with us all the time, and we are the media are with us all the time, and we are not even aware. We're shapeable. We are, together with our information, another good, another value that becomes very attractive for cyber criminals. We are dehumanizing ourselves in order to virtualize ourselves. Before, we would meet people in person, and then we would exchange phone numbers to be in contact. Now, we are Twitter users, we have an alias, we are Facebook users, or we might even strike a date through Tinder. Now we say, if I'm in Google, I exist. We have very intimate relationships with our devices that are connected to the internet. A few minutes after we wake up, most of us are already checking our cell phones. We check it more than 150 times throughout a day, and we actually spend around 2 hours a day with a cell phone on our ear. As these devices have become omnipresent, there is more data about our lives stored in an almost permanent manner in servers that can be consulted by other people, businesses, and governmental agencies. For thousands of years, we've lived thinking that we are responsible before an omnipotent a powerful God that would see everything and that would watch us in order to guarantee our salvation. For this reason, among others, religion is very powerful. Now, however, in just a few thousand years, we've reproduced that power, omnipresent power that sees everything inland, on earth, maybe promoted by less godly reasons, but more effective from a commercial standpoint. We're also immersed in an era of invention without precedents. We've passed from the first internet based on the web to the always connected world and the personal computers. The best novels are experienced in the social networks. In other words, most of the internet activity goes through social networks that have become today in the best platforms for all sorts of things, not only to chat and relate to other people, but also for marketing purposes, e-commerce, education, culture, media, entertainment, social and political activism, among others. This is a very important trend that includes society as a whole. In social networks, every person can build their lives, their persona, and what they believe is their virtual world. But it's not only about a virtual society. There is a very close link between virtual networks and real networks. It's a hybrid world. It's a real world. It's not only a virtual world or a world set aside. This is why most of the cyber crimes, even if they're committed in a virtual world, lead to real and material consequences that could actually get to really disrupts national security and destabilize a country or an economy. Today, from the comfort of our homes, without actually talking about a futuristic movie, we could actually be carrying out all sorts of transactions that we would have never imagined before. Go shopping, shop groceries, establish a relationship, design our own pizza, do bank transactions, manage our finance, work, or just get to know the world.
And it's this long line has not only put everything at our disposal, but when you eliminate the medium of the traditional channels, it has concentrated the power in the hands of all the giants, such as Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft is still fighting to enter this business. Now, who would say that the experience of the users is going to impact so directly in the sales volume? Nowadays, we use big data, and this is to use a lot of amounts of data with three main characteristics: volume, amount, speed, and speed of creating and using, and variety. The types of data that's not a structure is in social interaction, video, audio, or anything that could be classified in a database. And before allows the crossing of information and to identify habits, creating profiles, and predict tendencies. All of this through applied mathematics. That is to say, our conduct defines us and identifies also the knowledge of our profiles, allows us or leaves us in a certain sense vulnerable, not only commercially speaking, but faced to cyber attacks. And this is how I'd like to start this panel discussion, and I'm going to ask each one of the participants in the panel to very briefly make a presentation so that we could begin questions and open the questions for the panel. Are you in agreement? Fine. Cynthia is first. Ladies first. Thank you. Before anything else, I'd like to thank Adriana and Olga. For me, this is a new experience, a great opportunity. It's the first time that I can participate in this school, and it is I'm very proud representing the Mexican Internet Association. Julio Cesar Vega, yesterday our director said more about our association, AMIPCI, but I'd like to say that it's made up of more than 230 members, and it has a very specific quality. There are global companies there like Hewlett-Packard, whom I'm representing, and we have Google and Microsoft and Amazon, but we also have mid and small size companies of all the sectors. What do we all have in common? Well, we're all going to have the same mission, to generate an ecosystem of internet that is solid and broader and will take us to more economic development and more benefits for the country. So all of us, with our differences, have this great mission, and we're all working towards every day. AMIPCI, as of this year, the range of challenges is big because we have previous presidents, as Alfredo is one of them. We'd like to focus now on digital security as an umbrella of a lot of them. One of them is electronic trade, mobility, the privacy of information. Why are we focusing on something like this? All of us here, we understand that through digital economy, a country can be changed, can generate jobs, can generate development. This is a very important investment that all of the players has, beginning with the government and focusing for the better development of all the population. Another important thing that we do is yearly studies. So one of the most important or acceptance has had is that of the habits of the users. Although I would love to tell you how many users had, well, in 2015, I cannot do it because we mentioned it in May of every year. And I hope that on 17th of May you will join us, and I will work with amounts of 2014. In Mexico, more than half of the population is connected, is using the internet. It's a good number, but we're still have many opportunities. We realize that in the professional use, the exchange of emails is the main, and also searching or navigation. And of course, the social networks are the point number one of the social use for our users. It's marvelous to have the possibility to get to be entertained through the internet, but one of the challenges we have is how can we take it to a more productive use, that through it we can get training, more culture, more health and well-being is one of the issues that we are focusing in. Everyone here knows that there are benefits. We are talking about very broad aspects of the internet, but we forget something that's indispensable. The users. We are all users one way or another. And perhaps here we have certain knowledge, but there are a lot of people, at least in our country, who do not have this access, who do not know how to reach internet, and when they get there, they don't know how much they can use it. For example, we have huicholes, the artisans, which are huicholes. They can send their products all over the world. I'm very curious, so I'm always asking people all kinds of things. And now we always ask them, are you using the internet? If not, why not? And it's surprising that we have myths and that it's not trustworthy. And we have something interesting that was said by another partner is that 75% of the people that were interviewed are worried about internet. They're more worried to lose their phone than their pocketbook. And a lot of people don't do internet transactions because they think that they might steal their money trying to do a physical purchase. So if we are sufficiently informed, we could have a virtual life the same as we do in our regular physical life. How are we going to reach the challenges that we have in Mexican internet society? Well, working with the industry, the government, users, and academia. I mention the academia because of the need to have experts in different subjects of the digital world. It's indispensable, especially in Mexico. We have less supply based to demand that it is generating. And this is global because there's no geographic barriers here. So we have to continue with the better studies among those who make decisions in our countries. Where does cybersecurity and privacy of information is involved? On some level, more people will be joining the internet. And the privacy of information in AMIPCI, we want to give a positive connotation. It's a tool that not only gives us better well-being, but also business. And finally, what we want is a benefit of one way or another. The proposal here for our colleagues is let's change the message of security and privacy and make it positive. Let's look at them as tools and not as alerts or alarms. That's why my society is trying to push these efforts in all the form, and this is one of them.
Mil gracias, Alfredo.
Thank you, Alfredo, and thank you so much to Olga for being such good organizers of this event. And as you well know, I'm in public policy and relationships with governments, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. And for us, it's very important to be here today to begin this conversation, especially at this interesting panel of the kind of rights there are amongst protecting security, but at the same time, privacy of people. These are legal goods, and their rights are not absolute. So we have to see how one gives to the other. And I always use Benjamin Franklin's phrase that said that those who turn down their essential freedom to buy a little bit of security do not deserve either freedom or security. And it's interesting to see it now based on what is happening nowadays. I think we're going to get questions. And at first, it's just a very brief introduction. So I just wanted to say that in this area, we move public policy to improve the ecosystem of Internet, and especially in security. Google thinks that it's very important to educate the user so as to empower him and protect him. And I'm not going to go into this because that's the issue, that's the objective of this panel. Thank you, Lina. Now, well, Lina, please give her a hand. Abigail, you're next.
Can I first of all thank the South School for having me here today. I would also like to thank all of you for listening to me in English. I have to admit, if I was to attempt to try to speak to you in Spanish or Portuguese, my interventions would be super, super brief, so I appreciate the translation. My name is Gail Slater. I'm from the Internet Association. We are a trade association based here in Washington, D.C. We have, as of 2 days ago, I think 40 members. And the organizing principle for joining our association is that you're a company that's born Internet, so to speak. And so if you were to imagine the world without an Internet, the Internet going dark overnight, our companies would go out of business. So this is the organizing principle. And we had 8 founding members included in them in 2012. Was Google, Facebook, Amazon, the household names that you all know in your part of the world as well. And then our more recent joiners include many members of what we call the sharing economy. So Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, companies of that nature. And so we do a lot of work for all of our members on public policy issues here in DC, on Capitol Hill with the various parts of the administration, and other important stakeholders in Internet policy. Let's see. Our issues include things that will not surprise you, such as copyright, international trade, I've already referenced sharing economy, public policy issues, and a very, very important issue for the Internet, and an issue that will always be with us for as long as the Internet is in existence, is privacy and data security. And that's why I'm here to talk to you today, and also to listen with all humility to what you have to say about privacy and data security from your part of the world. And I did want to reinforce a great point that Lina made, which is I think there's a tendency in many of these debates to think about privacy versus security in a very black and white way, and we prefer to think of it as a world in which there are competing equities. In many cases, we'll turn on their facts. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the Apple San Bernardino case, because it's a classic example of these competing equities playing out in the real world, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Y ahora es el turno de Kevin Newmeyer, que nos va a...
And now it's Kevin Newmeyer who will give us an introduction to his issues. Please, Kevin.
For a little bit of my background, I have my primary jobs have always been in national security. I had the pleasure of working with AMIPCI in its early days in setting up the cybersecurity program here. And it's a pleasure to be back once again. I want to thank the South School on Internet Governance and the AMIPCI for inviting me back to the Hall of the Americas. It's been a while since I had the chance to speak here. In my academic hat, I spend most of my time researching Internet policy issues. One thing you will find is that our technology has vastly outpaced the ability of our governments and non-governmental organizations to enact policy to handle the technology that we build. The internet has certainly fueled this. As Gail mentioned a couple minutes ago, the Apple Department of Justice case, that's only one of the debates in space now. The actions, the events that happened in Brussels over the past couple of weeks and in France before that have caused the Europeans to sort of change how they look at this balance between security and privacy. And I tend to use the paradigm of the scales of justice. You know, you have to weigh the security and the privacy. There may not be any one set balance for all times, and it'll probably change as time moves forward. And another thing to think about in terms of privacy is how much information do we give away? If you think about it, how does Google make its money? Google's not necessarily selling you anything. In most cases, Google is selling you. I mean, they are an advertising company in many respects. So if you can't figure out what the product is probably you. So think about how you go through your daily life. You open a new software program, you get a new phone, your iPhone updates. What's the first thing you have to do? You have to accept some type of license agreement. That license agreement is very, in most cases, specific about who owns the information and what they can do with it. Now, who has ever read all 17 pages of the license agreement? So think about these things as we go forward, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you on questions as we go.
Muchas gracias, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. We have 6 questions that in some way we've discussed amongst us that we believe can deal with the issue deeply. So then we will open the floor for your questions. And the first question, and most basic, is the need of keeping a balance between national security and privacy. But where should we close this balance? Which one of you would like to respond? Lina. Thank you, Alfredo. Going into the issue that we have at hand, I'd like to begin by saying that the internet companies, in the case of Google, we invest a lot on the security of our users and privacy. Since this is a forum of fellows and future leaders at the internet, please raise your hand very honestly, those that are here, that you use Gmail or other Google products. I would like to know how many of you have come into my account and how many of you have put the double authentication. Honestly. When Vint Cerf was here and gave us his speech, he had something hanging that was his credential to enter Google offices, and it also had the chip, which is the double authentication, where any Google user can encrypt his messages and have all the control of his information, especially end-to-end. It means that if in your cell phone you are saving information, Google only has bits and bits, but you have the control. And sometimes one repeats these things and it seems like they're true and we are the merchandise, etc., but the way the system works really is very different. There is the publicity, of course, or ads, advertisement. That's why it's free for Obama or for labor, for Google services. But when you go into my account, you can stop activating or you can deactivate for transparency privacy and for a cookie. That means it's important for you to know because you control this, and unfortunately, many users don't know this, and that's why I agree with Cynthia that this has to be common knowledge. And just to give you some information, Time Magazine in 2015 analyzed this, along with other researchers, the policies of privacy at various companies of Internet, and Google is at the top, and also other consumers associations. And in the case of Google, there are hundreds of security engineers identifying attacks on vulnerabilities, etc. But this, beyond security, it's very legitimate for the countries to have information for research of crimes, because how else are they going to follow the criminals? Well, this is a very complex issue. What we do think in Google is that this equilibrium should not be broken under the rules that have been established till now, because privacy is not absolute, and it should give up with national security and those that we know so far, which is the need to know on behalf of the government, case by case, well-founded and motivated, the proportion of data that is asked by us or by the government in investigation, and the means of security when they have the information at hand. And what if the person is innocent, but you've already been investigated and they've seen your profiles and know everything about you? Since this is such a delicate balance, the discussion has always had a certain veil when they talk about encrypting by the companies, and if they go to the dark side. No, encryption is the way to protect the information in the 21st century world. But the internet industry promotion, like before, when there's a warrant or legal order that is very fast, and the companies have to give this information now because of national security. But there are lawyers that review this because we protect you as users. Imagine you put all of your information with us, and the fact that it leaves our hands and we lose control is very important for our companies. So in this case, what we do is review to see if it's too much. It goes back. Well, there's a series of procedures that have already been established for this. And we believe that at this time, this is a very delicate issue, that to think that these back doors could be given. And I'm going to say more, but I want to give the rest more time to address this, and I'd like to end my first intervention by saying that the obligation of a company is to guarantee security for everyone, for the hacker or any government that would like to have information at any time if it doesn't follow these procedures that I've mentioned, and this is where I will stop at this point. Thank you, Lina.
¿Quisieran alguno?
Would anybody like to add to this? You can do so. Yes, thank you.
Is that as governments make these trade-offs between security and privacy, and what they're requiring is, it's a balancing of risk. You know, does anyone know who funded the TOR, the original funding for that? It was the United States Navy on behalf of the U.S. government to allow for communications in countries where your presence on the internet could lead to your imprisonment. Okay. What you said became the issue. So there's a situation where the government funded a means of being anonymous. Okay. The downside of that is, if you're using Tor, you're probably anonymous. But some other court case or issues have shown up, they could probably crack some of it. So what is your balancing of risk? You know, you have a judicial order as a legal means of obtaining information. But what if you're using an internet service provider or using an internet tool that's not based in the same country where your order is valid? How do you go about doing that? In the world we live in today, as Dr. Drake mentioned, there's this fragmentation. The fragmentation of law is one of those fragmentations. These will all play into the fact in how you're balancing off security and privacy. There is no simple answer. So.
Just to make a brief intervention here, I think it's great that we are having this debate. I think it's great that we are recognizing that a balance needs to be struck. And the only wrinkle I would add to the discussion we've already had is, as I've said earlier, it seems there's often a debate around creating a balance between privacy and security, and there's a dichotomy between the two. In the case of encryption, and we're going to talk about this Apple case here in a bit, I think another way to think about what happened there was security versus security, and that was the real challenge for our member companies, because encryption is security. In some cases, encryption is national security. The national grid, which is critical infrastructure in this country, is encrypted. And so that was a way that a piece of the debate that sometimes got overshadowed by the privacy versus security discussion. And the other thing I'd like to add is that we often look at this debate and striking this balance in a very fact-specific context. I think that it's a much broader, wider national debate and international debate, and the proper forum for that is often it's often political deciders and not a single court case in Europe or in the US or wherever. Thank you.
Pasamos a la segunda pregunta.
We now go to the second question. The second question is, how do we balance the individual rights of data protection with the right to truth and memory on the web? This is a very hot issue. It's very interesting, and I don't think we should evade it here. Thank you, Lina. You're first. Thank you, Alfredo. As you well know, in the world there are different models for protection of private documents and privacy, and some of them have laws, and others through the organizations of consumers. The FTC in the U.S. defends these rights. And I'd like to say this because I worked for many years in the protection of data in Mexico, and there an acronym was created of what rights the user has with regard to their information, be it by the government or the companies, and this acronym is the ARCO rights. And since this is a school of the South, I try to be didactic. Well, the acronym is the A is you have access to your personal data, no matter whose hands it are in. R is to rectify it in case they're not correct, and C is to cancel them, and the O is to be opposed to the use for which one did not authorize it. And there are some principles also. These article rights appear in the world in different ways. In Europe, there was a group that was replaced by a new rule, and Europe has a very important development in preserving data. It's a fundamental right. And in Europe, and I'm sure that a lot of you know the famous decision by Costeja, which was also called the right to forget, because to be forgotten, right, to be forgotten. Well, this is something that they asked a newspaper to withdraw news of an individual which was affected because this news kept appearing in one because of the sale of some property. And because the newspaper went and digitalized, and so all this news continued on the internet. So when someone put the name, this news was always appeared, and it was affecting his life. So he asked for this information to be withdrawn, and the newspaper said no, because this was a legal piece of news at the time. And what the European government decided, that the searcher had to unindex that information and not the newspaper in the first instance. And this completely changed what the Attorney General had decided at that time. He said that the searchers are intermediaries who are only a mirror of reality, because the way the internet works with the search mediums, there is a webmaster who gets the personal data and leaves it available. Unless you put an exclusion robot, which is a way of programming the page, the searchers take this data when one places a query. For instance, if I put a name, first and last name, with the web crawler, it searches all of the internet sites to see if there was anything relevant with that person.
What has happened is that since the intermediary is now responsible for the data and is asking for withdraw that information, the sentence says that if it's irrelevant or it's all news, to pull it out. This is very complex because of the situation in Europe. After the resolution, Google implemented it. We do not agree, but we are a company that abides by the law and with the judge's decisions. And since that was the last instance, Google created an army of lawyers to review requests to withdraw information or disindex it. And basically, the word browser is used many times as a synonym of the internet, but the internet is much more than that. If that is in the diary, I can put that on Facebook, I can send a spam email and send it to everyone, or I can do actually many, many things. But at the end of the day, we're abiding by the decision. In Europe, more than 1,300,000 URLs are being analyzed, and 40% of them have been withdrawn, have been pulled out. The decision has put an American company in a very difficult situation. It's not a judge deciding case by case. They're saying you as a search engine has to address each one of the cases. We don't have to. We believe we should not be the ones deciding what case or not, because we should not be the ones censoring. The European resolution was done very fast. They couldn't really answer to more than what they were asked, but I just wanted to share something. In Latin America, we've had requests to do this, to pull out information, and the Supreme Court has decided very differently in each one of the countries. Why? Because here we have a very different human rights framework because of the American Convention of Human Rights, but also because the Rapporteurship of Freedom of Expression from the UN as well as the OAS. They all say, they all establish a very clear role for the intermediary and a limitation of the responsibilities. In other words, it's like saying that a postal courier is responsible because I'm threatening someone. I'm sending death threats in a letter. But at the end of the day, the court from Argentina, Supreme Court from Argentina and Colombia decided that the intermediary is not responsible. But I think the Colombian resolution was very well done. The court was very careful. The Colombian judges changed the name of the woman. They were very careful about that. However, in Europe, everyone will remember the person, the unforgettable Costeja. It's really hard to withdraw the information about the case that won the case, about the person that won the case. But in Colombia, the woman was accused of a crime that she did not commit. She was found innocent, and at the end of the day, she wanted the information to be taken out. She was accused. There was a trial, and then the decision was made. So when this search engine looks for glorious information, then the whole truth will be there. We want the full truth, especially in our countries in Latin America. And with this, I will wrap up. There is a big risk. What do you think is happening in Mexico? There are companies, especially there's one, Eliminalia.com, that is accusing, for example, they take an electronic means, small media, small journalists that are doing very important investigation about politicians, and they say there is a data protection law in Mexico, and they will be fined very big amounts of money. And since they don't have armies of lawyers to analyze the hundreds of thousands of names, they are actually pulling information out. And I think that's a danger, that's a risk, because the right to know and the right to know the whole truth is much more important than having to pull out information. And that's these are big challenges because privacy is being taken advantage in order to do, and it's having unintended purpose, unintended consequences. Cintya? These topics are very interesting. I wish we had more time. It's not easy to respond quickly, but there are two organisms. There's two things, the cybernetic conscience and security. Conscience or moral is to be responsible. For example, as a user, I prefer to be empowered and responsible and do a lot with my information instead of just being a victim or depend on what a government or a business decides to do with my information. I can do a lot from my side. The mentality of security is that we have to be more flexible in our roles and the use that we do of different applications, our work, our personal lives. And for that, we need clear and accurate information by the businesses. Lina was saying it, they have to provide the information, it has to be available, and we have to read it, check it, and make informed decisions. A very important actor here is a judge, of course. This is a very changing topic, and we have a challenge, therefore, in terms of training decision makers, those that are making the decisions on these cases. And we need experts. We need to approach them and say, it's not AMIPCI saying it. We have international experts that are available in order to train law enforcement people so that you understand the layers of the internet, how they work, how privacy should be, what are the best practices, successful cases in other parts of the world that don't have this blockade in terms of decision making. And that's precisely where these organizations need to collaborate, and we agree on these new ways of interpreting the law and applying those consequences on the virtual life. Thank you, Cintya. Any more comments? Abigail?
So interesting listening to Lina talk about how these issues were interpreted in Latin America. I was sitting here on this side of the Atlantic watching the case play out in Europe, and I was somewhat torn because I'm originally from Dublin, Ireland, so I guess I had a foot in both camps. But what was very interesting about that case from the standpoint here, sitting in Washington, D.C., was that there was, to my way of thinking and reading the court opinion, there was no uncertainty in the minds of the judges that in a world of competing rights, they have a right to privacy. It's a fundamental charter right within the EU system. But there are other rights. There's the right to know. There's the right to speech. That privacy trumped the other rights from the standpoint of the European Court of Justice. And it was very interesting to think about, in a hypothetical world, how that would play out in this country. I think it would be challenging to see privacy trumping the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It was the First Amendment for a reason, after all. It's of paramount importance to Americans. And I say that as a new American who's become naturalized as a citizen. And so that was very interesting. And the other thing that gave us pause for thought here was the extent to which, whether through this court case on the right to be forgotten, whether through invalidation of the safe harbor, which had the potential to end data flows between the EU and the US, and various other issues that have popped up in the EU system with respect to privacy. I think we're seeing increasingly a world where the EU privacy norm, if we want to call it that, is becoming more of a global norm. And in order to do business with the EU, in order for Google to do business in the EU, it's having to standardize to this norm. Again, the EU is its own jurisdiction. They have a right to pass these laws. But it was interesting that in that system, there was not much of a debate, to my way of thinking, about these competing equities, speech, the right to know, which I think probably would have played out in this country had the case occurred here. And also it sounds like did play out and resulted in a different outcome in Latin America. Yeah.
Gracias, Abigail.
Thank you, Abigail. I'm being told that we are running out of time. I think in 5 minutes we're going to run out of simultaneous interpretation. And they will wait us for 10 more minutes to serve the food. So let's try to speed up so that we can have simultaneous interpretation and also so that we can have lunch. The third question is, what are the roles to be played by government, industry, and users within the global context? What would be our main challenges? Cynthia. Well, when I think about the case of Mexico, I think one of the biggest challenges would be, well, the roles. He said it's the government, the industry, the users, and the academia. The government has to really understand clearly the benefits for them and for their citizens, the benefits of the digital world. It has to make their lives easier. In Mexico, with the new government, for the first time, we have an office that works on digital issues, and it's under the presidency. And that's an improvement, especially when we talk about all these sectors jointly to reflect our reality. Then the academia, like I said, has to produce much more talent. Human capital is completely indispensable here. And another challenge is the legal framework. Yesterday I was talking to a friend and he was saying the more regulation, the more inequality we have. And let's talk about this. There are people that know the legal framework, they know how to operate, they know what to do, but that's a very small part of the population. Many people don't have access to this type of information, and no one should be left aside. It has to also be a tool for everyone, absolutely everyone. And legal agreement has to be a result of a reality, and it has to meet certain needs. It can't be a straitjacket, not even for the industry itself. Too much regulation could lead to less innovation, less development. And then in terms of the end users, I think the internet is a democratizing engine. I think the users need to be involved, and they need to find the right channels in order to be represented in the industry, in the new products, as well as in the government. When the industry has to be transparent, offering information, and they have to abide by the law when there is a law, and it has to benefit everyone's lives. And then the government needs to be a receiver. They have to be open to the reality, and they need to understand it. Outside Mexico, they are aware that the barriers are not geographical, they're not physical. We can't be isolated. The ultimate challenge would be to have good practices, exchange good practices, and then pay attention to see how we can share information in a global manner, not only locally. Thank you. Lina? Well, in terms of security, I believe it's highly important for governments to establish cooperation channels that are fast, that are clear. Many countries are trying to adhere to conventions that might not be new, such as the Budapest Convention, but have many benefits, such as offering training, capacity building, exchange of information, and also to standardize crimes committed in the internet. Because if, like the president of AMIPCI said, otherwise we would fragment also the internet, and we're going to violate other duties, freedoms and rights of the users. For example, if we believe that because there's some work that is protected, we have to oversee what the user is downloading, then we're also violating certain rights. Therefore, we need to criminalize not the means, but the criminal, the person, the individual. We need to, like I say, focus on capacity building, especially judges. They have the last word when it comes to interpreting the law. If they don't know the nature of the internet, you are coming to this type of forum. You know the 5 layers of the internet. You know how if you move one thing in one layer or the other, might affect all the others. It's a very sensitive ecosystem. So we have to be very careful in terms of the right to be forgotten. The court or rather the authorities that work on data protection, they're deciding to delete information from the .com or more global domains, not only .uk, .fr. And sometimes that has a consequence. Sometimes it's the right for everyone to know where criminal of a sexual crime lives, but to think that what one judge might decide on something for the internet as a whole and that no one will be able to access, no one in the world will be able to access that information, that's something very different. Okay, let's move on to the next question. I think the next question will be very interesting for Abigail and Kevin. Let's work about certain cases that are taking place today between businesses and governments. I would like to talk about Apple, the case of Apple and other security agencies of the government. Abigail and Kevin, they have some experience in this regard. Do you have any comments in this regard? I would like to say that the interpretation is over.
Okay. So, I will try to be very brief. I want Kevin, obviously, to speak out on this one also, because I suspect he will have some opposing views to mine. So the Apple San Bernardino case is probably the poster child for the kinds of issues that we're talking about here, and it all played out in one courtroom in California, and it had to do with one iPhone belonging to one dead terrorist. And I've said previously, I think this debate is a very, very important national debate in this country and elsewhere, and so the case has happened. It's in abeyance now. The Apple and the FBI have reached a resolution whereby a third party has come forward to say that they have a way of obtaining information from Farouk's phone. So for now we're in a relatively good place, but about 2 months ago we weren't, and the FBI came to light, had sought and obtained a court order. And the court order essentially mandated Apple to unencrypt a device belonging to Farouk, one of the San Bernardino culprits. It was not your regular court order. The court order essentially mandated Apple, because Apple in 2014 had introduced end-to-end encryption to its devices, both hardware and software. And so the court order mandated Apple to write computer code, which is essentially a master key to unlock the iPhone. Many people said, not a big deal, it's just one iPhone belonging to one dead terrorist. But the pushback from our side, the internet, and we joined forces with Apple. We filed an amicus brief on behalf of our members, and many of our members filed their own briefs. The counter-argument to the government's position was this is a master key, not just to this one device. This is a key that can be used to unencrypt all devices and to essentially build a court-ordered mandate, a vulnerability into Apple's security. We live in the golden age of the data breach. Security is a huge issue for the internet, and encryption is used for many, many good ends to secure financial transactions, to keep end-user data protected and secure. And so the idea that a master key would be available not just to the government, but arguably also to others, the real bad guys and repressive governments overseas, was just too big a threat and too big a concern for the internet companies, for Apple in particular, not to speak out. And so we did. And we said essentially what I've just said, which is if we go here, this is not limited to one phone. This undermines security overall in a world where we can't afford to have those sorts of vulnerabilities out there. The time is short, so I'm going to give over to...
Thank you, Gail. And in reality, speaking as myself and not for any of my employers or previous employers, I tend to agree largely with what Gail has said. It was not just one iPhone. There's lots of phones that need to be cracked open for various and sundry valid legal reasons of drug trafficking, murders, whatever that can be solved. The question is, it's a balance. If you create a back door, you've inserted a back door. The bad guys can find the back door eventually. In fact, I'm actually rather happy that a third party came forward and the power of the marketplace essentially allowed somebody to crack the iPhone. Interestingly enough, Apple is now countersuing and saying, well, how did you do it? And you have to tell us how you did it. So that'll be interesting to play out. Unfortunately, the case did not resolve. And hopefully, before it finally comes to the Supreme Court in this country, they actually will have 9 justices and can actually decide the case. But in terms of the obligation of a government's fundamental obligation is to provide security for its people. If the government fails to provide security, then has it failed in its essence of being a government and is no longer functional. So I can see the arguments on both sides. Personally, I tend to fall much more on the libertarian, you can't get into my phone. If I was wearing one of my professional hats, I would say, give me the keys, I need to open this door, provided I have a legal document to do that. So, not a good choice either way, and let the market decide.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Bueno, pues vamos a la quinta pregunta, y es una pregunta dirigida a Cintya Martinez. En particular, México es un gran país que tiene realidades muy diversas sobre el uso y dificultades en este tema. Nos gustaría, Cintya, que nos pudieras compartir algunos aspectos de estas realidades.
Muchas gracias. Platicaba al principio de los estudios que como AMIPCI publicamos y de las preguntas que también en uno a uno vamos haciendo, eso también mucho a título personal, y de las complejidades que encontramos es que precisamente la penetración...
Y es una pregunta dirigida a Cintya Martinez. En particular, México es un gran país que tiene realidades muy diversas sobre el uso y dificultades en este tema. Nos gustaría, Cintya, que nos pudieras compartir algunos aspectos de estas realidades.
Muchas gracias. Platicaba al principio de los estudios que como AMIPCI publicamos y de las preguntas que también en uno a uno vamos haciendo, eso también mucho a título personal, y de las complejidades que encontramos es que precisamente la penetración de Internet aún no es tan alta como quisiéramos. Están haciendo esfuerzos, estamos trabajando tanto como industria y como gobierno en ello, aún hay una brecha enorme. Otro punto más importante tiene que ver más con la parte práctica en el día a día, lo mencioné, son los mitos, el desconocimiento y la desconfianza que todavía hay en muchos sectores para accesar a Internet. ¿Por qué nos impacta? Porque si la gente que aún no es usuaria o que no es un nativo digital sigue pensando que es inseguro, que no van a proteger su información, que para qué si no le va a servir, no vamos a tener el número de usuarios creciendo como quisiéramos. Entonces es importante cómo les hacemos llegar la información y el mensaje de que Internet es un ecosistema igual que nuestra vida cotidiana. Es seguro, te brinda muchísimos beneficios en tu vida individual también y lo tienes a la mano. Hoy todos lo tenemos este acceso en el bolsillo, ¿no? Lo que te brinda la movilidad es increíble. Personalmente creo que las posibilidades de Internet son prácticamente ilimitadas. Entonces, si hacemos uso de que cada vez hay más dispositivos móviles y esos tienen un acceso y una penetración en prácticamente todas las capas de la sociedad, tenemos aquí una posibilidad enorme de llevar estos puntos que hemos generado, que los platicaba al principio, y de socialización, de culturización y de educación hacia nuevos usuarios. Es importante cambiar el mensaje, eso para llevarlo de lado a lado del país, que es en positivo. Internet es para todos. Yo creo que todos hemos pasado por el gusto de tener algún adulto mayor o alguien generacionalmente distinto a nosotros, cuando por primera vez hace uso de algún beneficio de Internet, inmediatamente quiere más, genera una necesidad de mayor conocimiento, de mayor apropiación y de mayor contenido. Entonces, aquí para cerrar, creo que todos los que estamos aquí y en general todos podemos hacer un cambio, todos podemos ser voceros de los beneficios de este entorno y todos podemos servir de un ejemplo para los que nos rodean, para nuestros distintos países y para nuestra sociedad.
Gracias, Cintya. Bueno, pues vamos a abrir el micrófono al público. Por favor, todos ustedes, nos interesa muchísimo tener sus preguntas, contar con sus preguntas, ¿sí? Si nos podrías decir de dónde vienes, a quién le vas a dirigir tu pregunta, nos ayudarías muchísimo.
My name is Gustavo. I'm from Brazil.
Okay.
And my question is for Lina. When you asked us if some of us enter our area to configure our privacy settings and etc. I kept thinking, why isn't the standards higher? Why do we have to enter that at that settings? Because that's okay for us. We're supposed to be experts, and the old ladies and teenagers and this kind of people, why don't they deserve a standard higher privacy? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to answer in Spanish, but I suppose you speak Portuñol, right? For the rest of the audience, because there's no translation anymore. Bueno, rápidamente, el tema es que tú hablas de ¿por qué no hay un estándar mayor? Quiero pensar que a lo mejor estás abordando el hecho de decir que no haya publicidad, por ejemplo, y que cada quien decida si la quiere recibir o no, o al revés. El tema aquí es, como está hecho, los servicios de Google permiten que el usuario maneje su experiencia, sea el arquitecto de su propia experiencia, y que él sepa qué información recabamos en nuestros servicios cuando tú haces el sign-in y qué tipo de anuncios quieres. Si no quieres el behavioral targeting, por ejemplo, yo vengo a Washington y voy a recibir después publicidad sobre hoteles en Washington, parques en Washington, y yo tengo 3 hijos y me llegan cosas de parques infantiles, etcétera. Si yo deshabilito esa función, no voy a recibir ese tipo de publicidad. Siempre voy a recibir publicidad porque gracias a eso podemos leer nuestros periódicos gratis, por eso podemos conocer que hay una ONG de Human Trafficking para niños, podemos conocer muchísimas cosas, pero cada quien decide su experiencia. Yo creo que el estándar sí es alto, porque si estuviera hecho al revés, tendríamos que pagar esos servicios y no sería democrático para todos, ¿no? Y por otro lado, sí creo que tenemos que hacer un esfuerzo por mejorar, y en eso estamos trabajando. Es decir, no nos vamos a quedar en lo que tenemos actualmente, vamos a seguir mejorando la experiencia de usuario, mejores anuncios, etcétera. Creo que sí es un trabajo de todos los días, pero en términos de seguridad, sí, ya me cortaron la boca, ¿no? Creo que ya el tiempo se me acabó. Pero yo creo que sí, hay que empoderarnos en el hecho de saber cómo hacerlo, ¿sí? Y eso ahí estoy de acuerdo con Cintya, hay que manejarlo, y sobre todo en los nativos digitales, los recién entrantes, que sepan muy bien cómo manejar estas cuestiones y qué información sensible o no suben, porque también cada quien define su privacidad en el hecho de qué voy a poner ahí, si es sensible, si no es sensible. Entonces, poco a poco yo creo que cada quien va manejando su experiencia. Gracias.
Gracias, Lina. Por favor.
Hola, soy Anaí de Argentina y quería preguntarle a Lina cómo actúan en caso de campañas de desprestigio. Sí, ajá, exacto.
Está siendo popular, Lina. Vamos.
Bueno, quiero abordar un tema, por ejemplo, muy interesante, que es el de se le denomina pornografía por venganza o porn revenge. Es muy interesante lo que ha pasado ahí, que si una pareja en la intimidad se tomó fotos o etcétera en el acto sexual y después terminan, es muy desafortunado que en un alto número las mujeres son las que son víctimas de la divulgación de esa información, por ejemplo. Pero ahí es un hecho factual en donde no hay consentimiento de la persona para que su cuerpo sea exhibido, etcétera. Entonces Google ha hecho un esfuerzo para lanzar un formulario por el cual uno puede pedir que eso se baje. También se baja mucha otra información o se elimina del buscador para abuso sexual infantil o imágenes, etcétera. Entonces, cuando ya estamos hablando de otro tema que es el derecho al honor y al buen nombre, etcétera, ahí entran los jueces, porque ellos son los que tienen que dilucidar caso por caso qué es lo que procede, y ellos nos dan una orden judicial cuando la persona gana en última instancia y Google entonces baja. Entonces, así es como se maneja, salvo estas otras excepciones que son súper claras y súper factuales. De hecho, en el estado de California hay una ley de revenge porn que obliga, es más, castiga, porque es un crimen el subir esas fotografías. Entonces, como verán, van surgiendo nuevos tipos penales, las compañías se van adaptando, y el rol de las autoridades de protección de datos es muy, muy valioso para que también esto pues vaya mejorando, ¿no? Como lo decíamos antes.
Gracias, Lina. Pues, ¿alguien más? ¿O prefieren irse a comer? Pues un aplauso entonces a nuestros panelistas. Gracias.